Hello, and you're welcome once again to yet another segment and the last segment of The Mayor of Casterbridge, chapter 38. Henchard's anger for Farfrae. Now, by this time, we have already seen that Henchard and Farfrae are almost committed enemies of each other. Henchard, at this position of his life and story, cannot stand Farfrae for anything, for any price, because he thinks he is not just a rival in business, but he is a great rival who has in love, who has damaged him personally too. Now, after the incident described in the last chapter, Henchard has now been able to enjoy any peace of mind. He is secluded. He feels that he has been very much insulted. His pride is down, and he makes up his mind to punish Farfrae, because he is now perhaps he is seeking some sort of revenge, though revenge was not certainly a great part of his character. He now goes to Farfrae's house and leaves a message there saying that he would be glad to see Farfrae at the granary as soon as possible, the same day. Then Henchard decides to challenge Farfrae, a challenge coming directly from Henchard. Henchard then goes to the granary and climbs up the topmost story. His desire is to challenge and beat Farfrae. But it happens to him that he is much stronger and better built than Farfrae. Henchard has always been a person of stout constitution, though Farfrae was a Scotchman, but Henchard was a very stoutly built. He was 6'2", and then he has therefore an obvious advantage over the Scotchman. Actually, he wants to settle things once and for all. Henchard picks up a rope and binds his right arm against his side. Now he thinks that he is equal to fight Farfrae. Henchard spares the life, of course. Now, after the fight, a little while, Henchard hears the footsteps. Evidently, Farfrae is coming. He understands that his rival is approaching. Farfrae at this moment begins a hum, a tune, and it is a tune, the words of which had sung long ago in the Three Mariners Hotel when he had first arrived in the town of Casterbridge. Henchard has always been very responsive to an old melody. You see, Henchard, this is another characteristic of Henchard's personality, that he loves music. So the moment he heard the Scotchman hum a tune, Henchard's heart started changing. And it was good luck for Farfrae, because Farfrae also stopped singing, and then Henchard's resolution to have fight for Farfrae also hardens. What happens next? When Farfrae stands face to face with Henchard discloses the purpose of the meeting. Farfrae is somewhat surprised. He is stunned by this man of honor. He finds no alternative but to accept the challenge of duel or some sort of fight. After the turns and twists which were only to be expected in his physical struggle between the two men, Henchard gets the upper hand and is able to hold Farfrae in tight grip. Henchard has now just to push Farfrae down from the top story of the granary in order to kill him. But at the last moment, he changes his mind and he spares somehow Farfrae's life. This is a kind of, you can see, magnanimity of his character. But anyway, he doesn't cause much harm to Farfrae. And Farfrae also leaves that place, and he has appointment in the town, so he leaves that place. Next chapter, 39, the Skimity ride and the exposure, Lucetta's falling, the impact of Skimity ride upon Lucetta, and how Lucetta has taken the Skimity ride. Skimity ride, as I have mentioned, is is actually a kind of parade to ridicule people, to disgrace people. The mischief makers of the call, called Peter's Finger, had struck their, stuck to their resolve, and they are putting up some kind of show of Skimity Ride. And there are two effigies now, Henchard and Lucetta. At about 6 o'clock in the evening of the day, when the royal personage had visited Casterbridge, Lucetta is sitting alone in her drawing room. Suddenly she hears a loud cry nearby. After a few moments, Elizabeth Jane comes into the room in great haste, as if there were something urgent, something very imminent. And Elizabeth Jane tries to close the window, but Lucetta does not let her do so, and she casts her glance, and Lucetta sees a strange sight. There is a big and large throng of people, and in front of a great donkey with two effigies seated on the same donkey with the elbows tied together. And one effigy faces the donkey's head, the other the opposite side, the rear. But Lucetta is absolutely petrified to find that the effigy, her own effigy, and the effigy of Henchard, and same moment she immediately understands the meaning of it, and it casts a tremendous blow upon her mind. Elizabeth immediately sends for doctors, because she just passes out. She falls into a kind of a trance, a kind of a swoon. She doesn't feel well, and it becomes really fatal. Now, in these circumstances, Elizabeth immediately sends for a doctor. The doctor, after the examination, Lucetta, after examination of Lucetta, says that Lucetta's condition is not very well, not very stable, and the doctor says that Farfrae must be sent for immediately. Now, Farfrae is also summoned. A man is then dispatched to the town of Budmouth, where Farfrae is actually supposed to have gone. So they went to fetch Farfrae, because Farfrae is very much needed at the bedside of Lucetta. Lucetta is just passing her last hours. So this Skimity Ride actually becomes so terrible that it could, even nobody could think that Skimity Ride, a parade which is meant primarily to disgrace people, can actually take somebody's life. But it has taken somebody's life, and very poorly. Lucetta, the poor woman, falls victim to such humiliation. Chapter 40. Now, Henchard's efforts to bring Farfrae and Lucetta together, Henchard's efforts to bring Farfrae to Lucetta's bedside. Henchard has been feeling ashamed of this conduct since the time of his fight with Farfrae. Now, when he learns that Lucetta's condition is critical and Farfrae's presence by her bedside is essential, he is convinced that he must send Farfrae to Lucetta. Henchard then goes running along the road leading towards the town from which Farfrae is expected to return. Henchard is able to see Farfrae's carriage. He stops it. According to his plan, Farfrae is not yet to return to Casterbridge because he has to pay a visit to another town, etc. However, on hearing Henchard's shouts, he stops and he asks him what he wants. And Henchard tells him that, look, there is something which has come up very urgently and things are not very well, they are very critical, and you must go to your woman, you must go back to your wife, she is critical. But Farfrae doesn't take these words very seriously, because Farfrae by this time is, of course, he has started hating, despising Henchard. Henchard should be the number one enemy in his life, and therefore whatever Henchard says doesn't have any credibility to the ears of Farfrae. Under normal circumstances, perhaps he would have believed him, but now he cannot. But the memory of Henchard's fight with him and Henchard's original intention to kill him are still fresh in his mind. So Farfrae thinks that Henchard is playing some sort of a game with him, some sort of a trick upon him. He is up to something very malevolent. He therefore replies that he has no desire to return to Casterbridge, where Lucetta is now stationed. Henchard tries his best to convince him, but Farfrae doesn't listen to him. Now, feeling greatly disheartened, Henchard returns to Casterbridge, while Farfrae drives on to Weatherbury. Now, in this condition, when there is no hope for Lucetta, Lucetta breathes her last. When Farfrae eventually does return to Casterbridge very late that night, he finds that Henchard was right after all, and he feels a kind of remorse. Lucetta's condition has now become very, very grave, and this pageantry, that is Kiss Kimity Ride, has actually miscarried. There is little hope of her survival now. However, she is able to have a private conversation with Farfrae. She dies, she passes away, disclosing to her husband the secret of her life, namely her past intimacy with Henchard. So, at the dying moment, she reveals everything, whatever has transpired or whatever transpired between her and Henchard. Then in the same chapter, we see the strange visitor coming to Casterbridge. When Henchard returns to his cottage the night, Job tells him, because it is after all Job's cottage where Henchard is residing now. Henchard wants to know what sort of a man came and paid a visit, and Job says that that he looked like some kind of a traveler and sea captain. Henchard then starts wondering that what kind of person or who that could be. And the visitor is no other than the sailor Newson. I mean, what a surprise at the end of the story, that Newson, the man to whom Henchard once sold his wife decades ago, is now back, and who has been supposed dead and drowned, is now alive. But Henchard is not sure. But it is Newson actually. Newson had not been drowned in the sea. It was only a rumor, and which had completely, that false rumor, that imperfect dissemination of fact, altered everybody's life in this story. So Newson is back. The purpose of Newson's coming to Casterbridge was to search for his wife and daughter. Newson, who is alive after all, had been making inquiries about them, and his search had brought him to this place, Casterbridge. He has already been told that Susan is dead. He knows that Susan is not alive, so he is very much looking for his daughter Elizabeth Jane. Then he comes to the cottage. Henchard is reported. Henchard comes to know that he is alive, and Henchard at that time is not there. As we know, he had gone to Casterbridge in order to bring Farfrae back to the town. Newson goes away to the inn where he had taken up lodgings. Then Elizabeth visits Henchard's lodging. Elizabeth also pays a visit, but Henchard has already heard the sad news. Henchard then offers to prepare breakfast for Elizabeth, and she agrees to have it with Henchard. As she has hardly any sleep during that night, on account of Lucetta's illness, Elizabeth goes inside Henchard's cottage and falls into an uneasy slumber. And then Newson is misled. Just at the time, Newson calls again to meet Henchard. Henchard is, of course, surprised to see the man to whom he had sold his wife for 5 guineas long time ago. Now, when he makes inquiries of his daughter, he is given wrong information by Henchard. Henchard tells this lie because he says that Elizabeth is also dead, and Henchard tells this lie because by now he has developed a kind of real liking for Elizabeth Jane, because Lucetta is not there, his circumstances are reduced. So Michael Henchard is lonely, and therefore he doesn't want to part with her foster daughter, and that is the reason why he lied to Newson, saying him that Elizabeth Jane is dead. Of course, he had learnt immediately after Susan's death that Elizabeth Jane was not his daughter, but daughter of Newson, and that was reason why Henchard had become totally indifferent towards Elizabeth. But circumstances have changed. Henchard is a broken man now, and in Elizabeth Jane he can find the last hope. And after learning that Elizabeth Jane has passed away, Newson goes away, feeling very disappointed. Just think about this man after so many years, when he is back to Casterbridge looking for his only hope, wife and daughter. He has been told, he has found that wife is dead, and so is the daughter. Of course, daughter's death is only wrong news. Now, Henchard has got some fear. After Newson is gone, Elizabeth Jane wakes up and joins Henchard at the breakfast. Henchard now complains that Elizabeth no longer cares for him, but Elizabeth tells him that she still loves him very much. Henchard would very much like Elizabeth to come and live with him, but he does not ask her to do so. The reason is that he has a fear that Newson might come back again. That is the fear. That is the apprehension. And Henchard is a broken-hearted man, and therefore he wants to kill himself. He has now feeling that he has lost everybody. Susan is dead, Farfrae, Lucetta, Elizabeth. He finds no purpose in his life anymore, and therefore he thinks that the best action is to take his own life. With this thought, however, his mind, he walks into a deep pool close to the river, a very dramatic event. As he is preparing to jump into the pool, what does he find? He sees something floating in the water. Looking at the thing which was floating, he feels that his own dead body is floating there. Actually, it was the effigy of Michael Henchard which was finally dumped into the pool, and he's very much terrified. Being a suspicious man, Henchard returns home without attempting any suicide. So he drops his plan at the last moment. Chapter 42, Farfrae and Elizabeth meeting secretly. Now it is the turn for Elizabeth, Jane and Farfrae to reunite, because Lucetta is gone and Farfrae needs a companion, and so does Elizabeth Jane. The town council or the municipal corporation now helps Henchard with a financial grant, because everybody is feeling sympathetic toward Henchard, and Henchard begins life anew. He is now a shopkeeper. Elizabeth also now begins to live with him, but he discovers, to his great disappointment, that Elizabeth and Farfrae often they are meeting secretly, and these meetings, meetings can only mean one thing. Having lost his wife, Farfrae perhaps is thinking of remarriage with Elizabeth Jane. Now this discovery caused much pain to Henchard, but then he is so reduced in his own personal life, his circumstances have so deteriorated so much that he does not oppose. Had Elizabeth lost her heart to any other man in the world, Henchard would have accepted this position, but he cannot stand Farfrae. Next chapter, Henchard leaves Casterbridge. Newson appears on the scene again. He has learned from some source that Elizabeth is still alive, and therefore he pays another visit to Casterbridge. Henchard now sees no course actually open to him but to leave this place once and for all. He mournfully departs from Casterbridge and tries to find a job as a hairdresser, his original job. Newson now meets Elizabeth, who recognizes him at once. Elizabeth learns that Newson is her real father. She now thinks that Henchard's telling her that he and not the sailor was the father must have been a rumor, a hoax, a false information. And she therefore feels very glad that she has been reunited with her real father. The marriage of Elizabeth and Farfrae is then decided upon the full approval of Newson. At least something good happens to Elizabeth Jane. She is finally reunited to her real biological father. Elizabeth feels much offended with Henchard for another reason also, because Henchard had told a lie to Newson, deceiving him and deceiving Elizabeth Jane at the same time. And Henchard, of course, knew fully well that Elizabeth would feel offended if she comes to know about this fact. Chapter 44. The wedding between Elizabeth Jane and Farfrae takes place. The news reaches Henchard that Elizabeth is going to be married. He is filled with a strong desire to see her on the happy occasion. He buys a caged goldfinch as a wedding present for her because he can afford nothing else better. He then travels to Casterbridge on the day of the marriage, and he has a conviction. He has a very narrow meeting with Elizabeth, but she accuses him of having deceived her, of course, for obvious reasons. Henchard then leaves the place, and he is very much disappointed once again. And we are now in the last chapter of this novel, Henchard's death. Henchard is a broken-hearted man. It has been a tragic life for Henchard all along. Elizabeth soon feels sorry for the way in which she had treated Henchard. After all, we must remember that Elizabeth Jane is a soft-hearted girl in this entire story. She and her husband Farfrae now make a search for Henchard, but they learn that he is dead. He has left behind a note, and in this he will and it runs this. It reads like this: Michael Henchard's will, that Elizabeth Jane Farfrae be told of my death, or made to grieve on account of me, and that I be not buried in consecrated ground, and that no sexton be asked to toll the bell. Very melancholic tone, of course, and a last message is really sad, to just makes anybody cry. And that nobody is wished to see my dead body, and that no mourners walk behind me at my funeral, and that no flowers be planted on my grave, and that no man remember me. To this I put my name, Michael Henchard. The wording of this will shows how bitter Henchard has felt at the last hour of his life. Elizabeth Jane feels most unhappy for obvious reasons to think of how she had treated him on the occasion of his visit on her wedding day. However, knowing that Henchard had meant every word of the will, she carries it out. Well, that is the end of the story. Michael Henchard dies very poorly in poor circumstances, and that's it. That is the end of Hardy's great masterpiece, The Mayor of Casterbridge. The story of Michael Henchard is the story of a singular character. Of course, there are other characters, but the entire story is so predominated by Michael Henchard. His rise and fall, his decisions, his misdecisions, his actions, his restlessness, everything. But we must all remember that every man is entitled to make mistakes. Nobody is infallible in this world. But that poor fellow is only another character of Thomas Hardy. Thomas Hardy's books and stories are full of such most melancholic characters who have been pawns at the hands of fate, who have been very grossly victimized by fate and by some kind of, what should I say, a power which is most of the time beyond anybody's control. But here in this story, of course, we see fate plays some tricks upon Michael Henchard, but Michael Henchard is also equally responsible for so many tragedies that have come to his life, that have befallen him. And it is now time to judge the character and the story and the circumstances, and think very critically what could have gone wrong, or what could have been better in life of Michael Henchard. And I hope that my presentations, all these right from the beginning in multiple parts, been very successful. If I have made mistakes, I know that there have been mistakes, there have been errors, so I sincerely seek apologies. Good luck to my students. I wish them every success in their final examination. Thank you.